Welcome, everyone. This is Mackin's Storyteller Spotlight. My name is Kaya Heisey. I am here very excited to host Katherine Paterson today for a read aloud and a Q&A. Our very special thanks to Chronicle Books who helped us set this up. There are going to be 5 winners today that Chronicle has agreed to send out the new Jella Lepman book to their school. So you have to be here live to be entered. So if you get picked, you'll get an email from Mackin. So just be on the lookout for that. I know the school year is wrapping up, so we'll try to get those emails out ASAP, but we can always send the book when the school year starts again. Okay, if you don't know this yet, if you're new to Storyteller Spotlight, we use the Q&A button. So you might have to click the More button to see it, but then you use that button to put in your students' questions. If you as a class prepped questions in advance, absolutely start putting those in. Tell me the name of the student who asked or the name of the classroom who asked, so then when I ask Katherine, I can shout out your students. If you are taking any photos today of your students watching, we would love to be tagged in them so that we can see all of the young people that watch. We unfortunately can't see you through the screen, so we can only see you if you tag us. So we'd love to be tagged so we can see. I usually have the next Storyteller Spotlight here, but we are done for the season. So keep up with us this summer because we'll start promoting the ones happening in the fall. All right, and without further ado, let me introduce Katherine Paterson. Katherine is a beloved author of more than 40 books, including the Newbery Medal winners Bridge to Terabithia and Jacob Have I Loved, a 2-time winner of the National Book Award, honorary lifetime member of the International Board on Books for Young People, and former national ambassador for Young People's Literature. Katherine has been named a living legend by the Library of Congress. Residing in Vermont, she has 4 grown children and 10 grandchildren. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you so much, Kaya. It's a delight to be with you, all of you.
All right. So do you want to talk a little bit before you read, Katherine, or do you want to get started?
This is the book, my newest book, and I'm going to read from the first couple of pages because you may never have heard of the person I'm writing about, whose name is Jella Lepman. The name of the book, as you can see, is Jella Lepman and Her Library of Dreams, and you may get a free copy. And if you don't, do please buy it. They've done such a beautiful job with this book. I cannot tell you how grateful I am to Sally Dang and to Chronicle Books for making such a beautiful book. And now, for the first couple of pages of Jella Lepman and Her Library of Dreams. Everything about the flight was miserable. Of course, it wasn't meant to be comfortable. The man and woman were on a military transport built during World War II to ferry troops and armaments to the front. On this trip from England to Germany in 1945, the American colonel was crammed into his bucket seat along one side of the plane, facing across the cargo space toward a row of passenger seats on the other side. There was no looking out of the few windows, and the exit doors were meant for paratroopers to leap from. But there he sat, next to a middle-aged woman in an ill-fitting uniform with the golden oak leaf of a major pinned to her shoulder. What in the world was a woman doing on this plane? The Allies had defeated Germany. Its cities had been bombed to rubble. But the war was hardly over. Nazism was not dead. The army needed men, not women, to maintain order in the occupied zone. The noise of the engines made conversation nearly impossible. Still, there were the two of them strapped side by side, so he tried. If you were reincarnated, what would you rather be, a man or a woman? Assuming that's a purely hypothetical question, she said in the high-pitched, snooty voice of the European elite. Probably neither. I'd like to be a titmouse or a sunflower. You can tell from her choices of what she'd like to be reincarnated by that Jella Lepman was a very unusual person. And you had to be an unusual person to have accomplished the things that Jella Lepman accomplished, which is why I'd like you to know about her. She's one of those heroines that most people have never heard of. She was born in Stuttgart, Germany, the daughter of a wealthy Jewish family. And she became, amazingly, the first female editor of the most prominent newspaper in Stuttgart. But then Hitler came to power. And Jews, as you probably know, were on Hitler's hit list. So, of course, a Jewish editor of the most prominent newspaper in Stuttgart would not be able to keep her job. She was fired. And of course, she had no means of support. She was a widow. Her husband had died from wounds from World War I, and she had two teenage kids. Somehow she had to feed her family. She tried to work as a journalist, but there weren't many jobs. So friends said to her, conditions are not going to get better for Jews in this country. You'd better get out while you can. She fled first to England and then to first to Italy and then to England. But I'm not going to tell you the whole story because I want you to read the book. And maybe it's time to stop and ask what your questions might be.
Okay, so I'm gonna pull some questions from the Q&A. Go ahead and add your questions there. We've already got several, so I'm gonna turn off my video, but you'll still hear my voice. All right. Our first question, so this is about Bridge. Were you surprised at the success of Bridge to Terabithia? It was so popular in the 80s when I was a child. This is a teacher, and it is still so popular.
Nothing could have surprised me more. I wrote the book, as you probably know, because my son David's best friend was struck and killed by lightning. It was such an unbelievable thing to happen to such a wonderful child. I was trying desperately to make sense of a tragedy that made no sense to me. And I'm a writer, and a writer knows that a story has to make sense. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you get to the end, it might not be such a happy ending, but it somehow makes sense of the beginning and the middle. So I began to write a story, a fictional story, but I knew from the start that it was a friendship between a boy and a girl, and the girl was going to die. So I thought nobody's going to understand this book who isn't named Paterson. And I didn't even know if it would ever get published. I did it for myself. And so the response to the book has been absolutely unbelievable to me. It's still almost 50 years later. it's 48 years now, I think, um, sells all my other books put together. So generation after generation of children have read this book, children from all over the world. It's been translated in between 20 and 30 languages. I've forgotten the exact number, and more are added to it almost every year. So it somehow makes sense to children all over the world, which still astounds me.
Here's another question from Alan in the seventh grade. What inspired you to start writing books?
Well, I didn't mean to be a writer, but I had a professor in graduate school who stopped me after exams one day and said, "Have you ever thought of being a writer?" Well, I'm a reader, so I know what good books are. And I was horrified at the thought that I should think I could become a writer. And I said, no, wouldn't want to add another mediocre writer to the world. And she said to me, perhaps that is what God is calling you to be. And I thought, I didn't think God needed any more mediocre writers. He had plenty. But this professor got me my first writing job, and she has died now, but she, in her lifetime, took credit for all the books I wrote because she was the one who got me started on the path to becoming a writer.
Here is a question from a teacher in Pasadena. The Great Gilly Hopkins is still a very important book. How can we reintroduce this wonderful book to new generations? P.S. I adopted my 4 and 5-year-old boys because of this book.
Oh, thank you. I mean, you are a courageous, loving, wonderful person, and I'm glad to hear your voice through your question. Um, I wrote Gilly Hopkins because my husband and I had adopted our two daughters. We have two sons, homemade sons. My younger daughter said, "Mom, when you say that John and David are homemade, it makes them sound like Pillsbury Doughboys." So I have two lovely daughters and two Pillsbury Doughboys, apparently. But I was asked, my husband and I were asked to be temporary foster parents for two brothers. And it wasn't working out very well. And I've had to think, what's the problem here? Of course, the boys had problems. They wouldn't have been with us if they hadn't had problems. But it seemed to me that the problem was not quite that simple. And I began to listen to what I was saying in my own head. And I was saying things like, well, I can't deal with that problem. They're only going to be with us for a few weeks. Or, thank God they're only going to be here for a few weeks. And when I heard what I was saying in my head, I didn't say it out loud. I thought, that's why crimes are committed and wars are fought, because somebody thinks somebody else is disposable. So I wrote Gilly, trying to imagine how I would feel if somebody thought I was disposable. If you haven't seen the movie that my sons wrote and produced of the Great Gilly Hopkins, I think it's still on Netflix. Kathy Bates plays Mamie Trotter and does such a wonderful, wonderful job of it. So that's one way to introduce the book. I usually say read the book first and then see the movie. But in this case, even if you don't read the book, see the movie. It's really quite wonderful.
Hazel from Penn Wine wants to know, or Win, Penn Win, wants to know, where is your favorite place to write?
Well, now I have a study. And so, of course, that's my favorite place to write. But when I started writing, I didn't have anything like a study. I had four little children, and I wrote on the dining room table. And then, of course, when it was time to eat, I had to clean up everything and uh, start all over again the next day trying to get things. And of course, those days, I I wrote by hand, and then when I had a rough draft, I typed it on a old Smith Corona portable typewriter. So it wasn't like having a computer. Uh, but so I wrote wherever I could, and I wrote whenever I could because I mean, you have four little children, you don't have much time, do you? And I resolved that I would not write when anybody needed my attention because I'd be paying attention to my writing and not to uh, my kids setting something on fire or running into the street or something. So um, when people say, "What's your writing process?" I say, "Oh my gosh, I write whenever I can. I've always written around interruptions. I have a lovely study now, um, and but I haven't always had a lovely study. Uh, and I'm not one of these people who can write on airplanes or in uh, in bus stations or just anywhere. I mean, I have friends who are that kind of writer, but no, I have to be someplace where it's quiet and I'm not that often interrupted.
Miss White's fourth grade class in Golden Valley, Minnesota, wants to know about you as a child. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What were you like as a kid?
Well, I was born in China and I lived there until I was 5 years old. And then the war between China and Japan began. That was before World War II, when the whole world was involved. Was a war in the East. And we fled to the United States. We were refugees. Fortunately, we had relatives to move in on, or we would have been totally homeless. And then things settled down. The Japanese occupied most of eastern um, China. So we went back to China, and then everyone out there knew that the United States would be involved in the war before too long. And so we were refugee back again. Again, we stayed with the relatives until my father found a job in North Carolina and we went to North Carolina. So I spent part of my childhood in North Carolina. And then we thought we were going back to China. So we gave up our house and my father's job. And we were stopped from going back to China. So then we lived in Virginia for a while, and then we lived I actually graduated from high school in West Virginia. So I've lived all over the place.
Um, can you tell us about what sparked the desire to write about Yella?
Well, I was actually asked to write this book. I already knew about Jella Lepman because I'm very active in the International Board of Books for Young People, which is one of the organizations she started and which you'll read about in the book. Um, I was aware of her starting the library in Germany, and I was asked by Christopher Francis Kelly, who's on the board of the library, because they were looking forward to the 75th anniversary of the library, and he asked me if I would write a story about her, and I did. I mean, it took a long time to get this, not so long to get the story written, although research, of course, is always important when you write a book like this. But we didn't know how the book should look. We wanted a wide age group reading it. We wanted not only young people reading it, we wanted teachers and librarians reading it, and parents and everybody. We want everybody to read this book because we want people to know what she did. Uh, and so the solution was one that Clarion and the wonderful artist Sally Ding and the art art director at Chronicle, whose name I keep trying to remember, and I should be able to tell it to you because I write it down and memorize it so when people ask, you can say what a great job they did working together to make this book a combination of actual photographs from the time and Sally Dang's art, which enhances and I love illustrators who can, and I've had the best luck with illustrators, and Sally has done it so beautifully. Extend the vision of the book, bringing another mind and another set of gifts to the book that makes the story more beautiful than I could have made it.
Miss Jeremiah's fourth grade class in Jamaica wants to know, do you have any tips to help students who may be scared to write creatively?
Oh, it's a scary business, folks, because when you write, you're putting yourself on the page for somebody else to see. And that's scary because maybe somebody won't like me. And believe me, if you write, there will be plenty of people who don't like you. I'm fortunate that a lot of people do like my books, but people won't. So you have to be brave. And I think I'm a particularly brave person, but I think, well, yes, I'm brave enough to put myself, my good self, and my not so lovely self on the page. Because you can't write about villains unless you feel that villain inside yourself. You can't write about angry, jealous people unless somewhere inside you that person is. And when you write about jealousy, you write about evil, you write about just plain snarkiness, you're putting yourself out on the page. So congratulations when you're brave enough to do it. Because a lot of people, they tell me, oh, when I have time, I'm going to write a book. And I think to myself, although I don't tell them that, I think to myself, you'll write when you have the nerve to write. Because if you have the nerve to write, you'll find the time.
Yep. Can you tell us about the experience of your book getting made into a movie, Bridge to Terabithia, getting made into a movie? What was that like?
Well, there were several attempts, and there was an after-school special of Bridge to Terabithia, which, it lasted 45 minutes, so you can imagine how much depth there was to it. But my son David, who has become a writer, and he writes plays and movie scripts. My friend Stephanie Toll and I had written a play of Bridge to Terabithia, and when the play was premiered, David said, "Could I write a screenplay?" And I said, "Sure, I want to write a screenplay." And because he wrote the original screenplay of Bridge to Terabithia and demanded part of the producing end of it, he fought to keep the movie true to the book. Of course, they didn't want Leslie to die. Nobody wants Leslie to die. But it was David's friend who died, and he knew if they don't let Leslie die in the movie, it would be a travesty. And so he fought. He's he's a little bit dramatic, and he tells me about standing in front of all the Disney big wigs, waving the book in his hand and saying, "See these last 28 pages? Read the last 28 pages. This is why this book is loved all over the world. Don't touch the last 28 pages of this book." So, as I've often said, we didn't win every single battle in making it into a film, but we won the war. And so it's a movie that I'm moved by and I'm proud for people to see. Gilly Hopkins, because to Disney's great surprise, British Terabithia made a lot of money for them. So, it's a success. Well, immediately you write Bridge to Terabithia 2 or Son of Terabithia or whatever, you keep on doing English sequels to Terabithia. And when they called to tell us that's what they wanted to do, we said no. And he said, "What do you mean, no? You want more money? No, it's not a matter of money. There is not a sequel to this movie." So when we asked them about doing Gilly Hopkins, they just laughed in our faces. "Well, if you do Bridge to Terabithia 2, maybe we'll consider it." Well, so my son David teamed up with his brother John, and by the hardest, they made the Great Gilly Hopkins into a movie. It was a very independent film, but being totally independent, they had total power over it. And it is quite a wonderful movie. I don't think there's anything in that movie I would change. The acting is marvelous, and it stays very, very close to the book, of course. It doesn't end in a telephone booth. And I said to Johnny David, I said, "I know you're going to have to do something so that it doesn't end in a telephone booth, because that's not what you can do in a movie. It's just not jazzy enough for an ending. So give me an ending that I can live with." And they did. It's quite lovely.
Okay, last question. This is from a group of third graders. They'd like to know what your very first job was, and if you didn't become a writer, what would you be doing for a career?
I don't think I could get hired to do anything else. My first job, I was working at a telephone company, and I had to write all these figures. I was supposed to type in all the figures um, of, of bills for different companies. And I think I was 16 years old. And I kept making mistakes and having to erase them because it wasn't on a computer, it was on an old typewriter. And finally they said, "Oh, just do it by hand. You can't type." Without making mistakes. So that was my first job, and I certainly would not go back to it. Uh, and I don't know what I'd do if I wasn't a writer. Um, I've been a teacher, I've been a missionary, but I'm not going back to either one of those at age 92. I think maybe I'll just retire.
Okay, so Catherine, there's been so many sweet messages in the chat. I will pull that out and send all of those to you. If there's anything else that you want to tell Catherine about the impact she's made on your life or your kids' lives, please put that in the chat now. We have just 30 seconds left. Catherine, is there anything you want to say to all of the young people and the teachers watching?
Oh, well, thank you for coming. First of all, it's been a joy. And do keep reading. I mean, I don't care if you write or not, but do read because it will enrich your life in ways that you cannot imagine.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. This was so rich, and the questions were beautiful. And you guys obviously always do a good job, but you did a really great job today. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone that came. Have a wonderful last couple weeks of school. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
And I hope you have a sunny summer. We had nothing but rain around here.
That's right. Okay, bye.